Here we go. Going. All right. Okay, we are live. Good evening, everybody. This is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we're really delighted to have our friend Paula Munier with us to talk about her brand new book, The Wedding Plot. And Paula has graciously signed a batch of books for us, which arrived just in time. And I will go ahead and put a link to the signed books in the comments field on YouTube and on Facebook. We've had an interesting technical glitch today. Barbara Peters is in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where they have had some sort of horrible storm blackout, but we've got her on the phone. So Barbara's going to conduct this interview remotely. And I guess, Barbara, should I just go off screen and kind of be waiting?
No. I mean, we need at least two live faces. Why don't you stay there? You always have great questions, Patrick. Let me sort of do the leading, because obviously you were not prepared to talk to Paula, since it was supposed to be me. And also, if I suddenly disappear, depending on how this technology goes, at least you're there.
This is the first time we've done it this way, folks. So,
and I hope the last. Right. Well, anyway, we're all dog lovers here. And I'm only sorry that I can't show everybody watching a picture of my little puppy with her broken leg emerging from surgery. I've never seen a puppy that is totally stoned, but her eyes, it's so funny to look at her. I mean, I'm sad that she's in that shape. A big dog jumped on her and snapped her back leg. But it's just her cute little face, and then her eyes are all completely googly. Anyway, I can't share that photo with you at the moment. But so you have two large dogs that we are going to be talking about, Elvis and Susie Bear.
Actually, Barbara, I can show the picture.
Oh, you've got the picture.
I got the picture.
Put
it up. Barbara, you won't be able to see it, but it is a great picture.
It's just a one.
Here we go. Here we go, folks. There she is.
Poor little thing.
She looks
poor little trouble.
Looks like she's feeling no pain.
Yeah, she looks happy.
And Barbara, what's that horse next to her?
She's in a cage at our dog sitters, so she's not allowed out. So it's a toy, I imagine. But I mean, she's little. She only weighs about 14 pounds, and she's got that little funny white beard. So compared to Elvis, Paula, or Susie Bear, she's just a little speck. But anyway, we're here to talk about your wonderful book, The Wedding Plot. And so the first thing I would say to you, Paula, is why is it that weddings always seem, in crime fiction or perhaps in real life, to be causes, not always, but frequently seem to be causes of family drama and occasional homicide?
Well, there's so much emotion associated with the wedding, not just on the part of the bride and groom, because the wedding is really the coming together, not just of two people, but two families, right? Two communities. And so there's inevitable friction, not just within each family, but within both families together and apart. And I just think weddings are great. I love weddings. They're very sentimental. They bring out the best in people and the worst in people. And, they can be murders. So.
Yes, well, absolutely true. And you're right, because if you take every family, what is it Tolstoy said, Patrick? Every family is unhappy in its own way, I think it is.
Every happy family is alike. Every unhappy family is different, unhappy in its own way, or something like that.
Yeah. I think that's roughly it. And it's certainly true that too often when you're bringing together clans who have no other reason to be together except that one member of each is about to marry the other, you can wind up with bringing all that drama into it. I'm always amazed reading advice columns at because I do them occasionally as a window into human nature, like Dear Abby or something, and the tensions that wedding invitations bring. You can't bring children, or you can't bring a standby partner or whatever it is, and people get their feelings hurt or if they're not included as members of the wedding. But fortunately in this, you have this beautiful place. So describe it to us, because part of the fun of this book is this gorgeous inn where the wedding is going to be taking place.
Yes, well, I do my books by season, and the past two books have been set in, cold seasons. And so my editor said no more snow. So I said, okay, the next season will be June. And June is wedding season in Vermont. And there are all kinds of wonderful destination resort places to go, from barns to really swank luxe places. So I had a great time during the pandemic researching all these places. And I've been to some of them. One is the Woodstock Inn in Woodstock, Vermont, which is a beautiful, quintessential, spectacular New England town. And it's an old place. And then there's a place called Twin Farms, which was ranked by Forbes as one of the most luxurious hotels in the world. And it's this really swank place anchored by an old tavern, but then it's got all these modern amenities. It has a 20,000 bottle wine cellar and a chef who designs every menu just for you based on your own culinary taste. And so it's kind of a combination of these two places in an area close to Woodstock, Vermont, which is where the showy ladies' slippers bloom every June. And they're rare wild orchids that are losing their habitat. So they're not found very often anymore, but they are at Esquibog in Vermont. And we went to see them and they're beautiful. So I thought, well, let's call it the Ladies' Slipper Inn after these wild orchids and set it during the peak blooming of the orchids.
Oh, that's so lovely. The only time I was ever in Woodstock and actually stayed at the Woodstock Inn was in the fall. And of course, all the leaf peeper people, you're battling them to the death. And I hadn't really, there's no room to move, but I hadn't really thought about how lovely it would be with June. But the other thing I noticed, that it comes up on the first page of your book, is somehow or other, every place that I have read about in Vermont seems to come with goats.
Yeah, yes, goats. Well, Vermont is known for its artisanal cheeses. And a lot of that cheese is goat cheese, not just, cow-based cheese, but also chèvre. So I love goats. I'm sort of angling for a goat here at the house, but my husband has put the kibosh on a goat after 3 rescue dogs and a rescue cat. But I thought, what fun. I'll put it on a goat farm and we'll have, artisanal cheeses and goats and, what fun, right?
Oh, yeah, no, absolutely. I like the whole locavore idea. And indeed, I think Vermont and New Hampshire and upstate New York certainly is full of places where, you can go with luxury and then eat all the local stuff. So, no, I love the setting. As you say, it's very luxurious and the drama takes place all around that. And it seems to me, Paula, that it's really critical for anybody reading this book that they read the prologue and pay attention.
Well, yes. I mean, sometimes we hope, nope, they don't pay too close attention. That's kind of the misdirection of a mystery, right? But yes, the prologues are important. I mean, I think that it's interesting, certainly when you have an old places come with old secrets. And this is set in an inn it's been around for, 200 years. And you have 2 families with backstories. And as we all know, people put on their best foot forward. They put on their best selves. And then once you get to know them and once you get to know the families, you find out that families have secrets too. So that's, I think, another reason that weddings are fun to write about, because inevitably some of the secrets come out.
Well, I don't think it's a spoiler to say that, this being a murder mystery, and despite all the joy of the wedding, there's going to be some evidence of a murder. And in your case, what comes up early is old bones, that surface. And so in order to know who the old bones are, it ties back to the prologue.
Exactly right. So I like to have lots of things going on in terms of the story. I like to have lots of plot elements, and maybe too many, but it's fun that way. And those are the kind of mysteries I like to read, right? The ones with all stuff going on, like Colin Dexter, Morse kind of clues. That's the kind of thing I love best.
Yeah, well, because you're also a literary agent, are you attracted as an agent to the same kind of book?
I am. I mean, I represent a lot of crime fiction simply because I love it, right? And I know
Right.
it well. I do represent a lot of crime fiction, but I also represent women's fiction and a lot of nonfiction. Whatever I fall in love with, right? Like a reader, you want to fall in love with a story, and when you do fall in love with a story, then you want to read it, and as an agent, I want to sell it.
Well, but you're an active agent, and now you're an active author. And what interested you in writing crime fiction as opposed to me? You could be writing romance, or you could be writing, whatever, poetry for all I know. So, since you represent.
Well, I think, I always loved crime fiction as a kid. I loved Nancy Drew and Sherlock Holmes, and then Agatha Christie. My mother read mysteries, and she always had them around the house. So I read all the old, Golden Age, Ellery Queen and Rex Stout and Nero Wolfe and all of those stories, Perry Mason. I read them all. I read Nagayo Marsh and Agatha Christie. I loved all those stories, and I read them when I was really pretty young. I was maybe 12 when I was reading all these, and I always had a secret yen to be a mystery writer, but I didn't act on it for a long time.
So did representing authors who write mysteries help inform? I mean, we always get questions about, don't we, Patrick, about craft and about how you write. So I'm detouring into that for a minute. Having represented authors who write mysteries and therefore you're acquainted with their work, did that help shape your own your own desire to write them and then how you write them?
Sure. I mean, I admire so many crime writers, and I had always belonged to Mystery Writers of America for many years. And I was very active in the New England chapter. And I was always writing novels and never finishing them. And Hallie Efron said to me, you really need to finish one of these mysteries. But I was working as an acquisitions editor at the time, and I was busy helping other people deliver their books into the world. So I didn't really think about it. But when I became an agent, all my friends who wrote mysteries who didn't have an agent yet said, hey. And so I got all these great clients right away, mostly unpublished mystery writers. And we got a lot of them published, and it was great. And so I learned a lot doing that, right?
Yeah, well, I don't see how you could not, but I just think it's very interesting. Patrick, do you recall whether we've talked to other authors who are also agents?
I'm trying to think. It strikes me that there's at least one, but I can't recall who it is. But it is. You're like the entire package. Teacher, writer, agent, and you're also an editor, right?
Yes, I was an acquisitions editor for 20 years.
So I mean, a lot of people may have the misunderstanding that these are all the same skill set, but in fact, they're very different skill sets. Don't you think? Oh,
absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because as an editor, you learn to edit, right? So it kind of correlates to the stages of the writing process where you have to come up with the idea, right? And as a reporter, I was originally a reporter. And so I think that helps you generate ideas because you're always looking for ideas as a reporter. So that helped with that stage. And then the writing is, just the writing itself, which again, as a reporter, you sit down and you write, that's what they train you to do, and you got a deadline and you do it. And then as an editor, I learned how to revise, right? Not just other people's work, but my own. And then there's the whole promotion aspect. When you become an author, it's one thing to be a writer, but when you get a contract, then you have to become an author. And that brings this whole other aspect of sales and pitching. And of course, as an agent, that's what I do. So every stage of the writing process sort of correlates to the seats at the table. And I've had most of those seats one way or another.
But you're not your own agent.
Oh, no.
That wouldn't work, would it?
It's like being your own doctor, your own lawyer. You don't want to do that. No, I have a wonderful agent, Gina Panettiere. So, no.
Yeah, no, that's an obvious question. I'm glad Patrick asked it because I was going to say that I would think it would be hard to represent yourself, and find a publisher for your own work. But do you find that, that being an author has created any tension with publishers or whatever? I mean, they're okay. I mean, you have a very good publisher, Minotaur, who
yes.
does, that's what they do is crime fiction. But it doesn't cause any problems that you're then representing other authors and other work with other publishers?
No, I mean, not really. I have a very good agent. And so I let her handle all that. And I do what I'm told. I do what my editor tells me to do. Pete Wolverton at Minotaur, I do what he tells me to do, and I do what Gina tells me to do. And I always tell my clients, I do what my agent tells me to do. I do what my editor tells me to do. Maybe you should too. That's a good way to get along in this business is to develop these relationships, But I do think that sometimes it's hard for writers to let go of that. And I know how to let go of it because I sat at the table in all these roles. So I think it's easier for me in some ways, although the publisher has, I think, higher expectations of me in some ways, expecting me to understand all the things that a new debut author who doesn't know publishing as well would understand. I think they hold me to a higher level of expectation, what I'm supposed to do in terms of promotion and all that kind of thing, because they figure I should understand how important all these aspects are.
Oh, yeah, I can see that would be a natural corollary. In fact, since I always read the acknowledgments at the end of books when I finish them, your acknowledgment is very much a tribute to your editor, Pete Wolverton, but also kind of sad because, the circumstances under which you wrote this book, you lost your father.
Yes, I had just started writing the book this last year during the pandemic. And my dad died. Now, my parents live with us in this big old house in New England. And, they moved in. We bought this big old house so we could all live together because they had reached a time of life when they really weren't able to live on their own. But still, I didn't expect it. And perhaps I should have, but I didn't. And so it came rather unexpectedly. I was sort of just stymied by the whole thing. I had never suffered that level of grief before. My father was a very big presence in my life. He was our family's moral compass. He was a guy who trained your dogs and fixed your car. And if you had a wayward teenager, they went to live with him. He was that kind of guy. He was a real officer and a gentleman. I loved him. And so when he passed, I was sort of stuck. I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything, much less write a book. And my deadline was looming, and Pete, my editor, was very generous and compassionate and gave me the time I needed, but also he helped me get through it. And I started writing about my dad. I thought that would help me process my grief, and it did so. I just wrote him into the book. So he became a character in the book, and it was my way of honoring him. And Pete let me do that. And I think my dad is smiling, somewhere.
That's really so nice. There have been so many stories that Patrick and I have heard about authors, and during the pandemic, some of them have been liberated, some of them have been stymied, but it's always been just about the pandemic. But in your case, to lose somebody so close to you and then that becomes part of your creative process, and also your editor saying to you, "Come on, Paula, you're a professional, keep
Yes.
at it." Right. Which I do see how it definitely shaped your story. But another question I have for you, and this one comes up. Patrick loves to ask this question, so I should have him asking this question. But there are some very interesting names in this book, and particularly one guy, the guy that goes missing and is kind of the focus of the drama. What on earth? Where did that name come from?
Yeah, Bodie St. George. His name is Bodie St. George. And he has quite an interesting backstory. But when we meet him, first on the page, he's a yoga teacher. He's a spa director at this luxe, extravagant resort. And so he runs the yoga classes and the meditation classes and the Pilates classes. And he's just a real semi-enlightened guy, right? He loves Buddhism and baseball and mind, body, spirit kind of stuff, the Dalai Lama. So I had great fun writing him. He sort of came out of nowhere. I just sat down and I had this idea for the beginning in my book, not that beginning. And I sat down and out came Bodie St. George. And I don't know why or how, and I've never really channeled anything before, and it probably will never happen again. I won't be blessed again, but he just came out of a lot of things I knew, a lot of soldiers who then became learn to do yoga. I am a certified yoga teacher, so I know a lot of yoga teachers and I know a lot of their backstories. And so I think that's where Bodhi came from. And he was so much fun to write because I love baseball and I love yoga. So that was fun to create this character who embodied both.
No, he's really interesting, but the two names are sort of dissonant. Bodhi, which I understand from the yoga, but then St. George is so British. I just wondered why you put them together like that, Bodhi, St. George.
Well, Bodhi, because it's, kind of a Zen kind of name, right? And St. George, because I wanted him to be a dragon. St. George slayed the dragon. So in some ways, he's my dragon slayer in this book.
Okay, well, that makes sense. Now we have the bridegroom, Mercy's grandmother's fiance, and his name, if I were being French, I would say it was Claude Renaud. So I don't know how they pronounce that in Vermont, but it's double French. So is this a French family, or did you just like the idea of Claude, or did you call him Claude Renoir, or how did that work for you?
Well, he's from Quebec, so I made him French, and
okay,
I have a sort of soft spot in my heart for the French, because I've lived in New Orleans, where you have Cajuns and Creoles, and I've lived in Europe, and my daughter lives in Lausanne, and my grandchildren speak English with a French accent. So whenever I can weasel any French into my stories, I always do, because I love the language. So I made him French because I thought that gave him, he's from Quebec. He's a large animal surgeon. So her grandmother is a vet. So it's a natural coming together. And it gave him a little exotic flair, I think.
Yes, it does. And you do mention the fact that Quebec, it does play into it's in the background of the story. I just thought it was sort of fun to have Bodhi St. George and Claude Renaud, both of the book. It made it fun. So why don't you tell us how the story begins? I've mentioned the prologue, which I think I went back and reread the prologue when I finished the book, so I thought that was a good idea. But what happens when everybody foregathers at the Lady Slipper Inn? Because it doesn't go smoothly right from the beginning.
No, it doesn't go smoothly. So Mercy's mother, Grace, who's a very perfectionistic, chic, high-powered attorney, everything that Mercy is not, she's going to plan her mother's wedding, the grandmother, Patience. And she's become a sort of bridezilla, wedding planner from hell, determined to give her mother this perfect wedding at this perfect place. And of course, what happens is it's going to be this multi-day event, right? And the wedding guests are going to come, they're going to stay at this swank place, and they're going to get a special spa day as part of the experience of this wedding. And the spa director, Bodhi St. George, goes missing. And so she goes to Mercy and Elvis and she says, go find the spa director. We need him. We cannot be without the spa experience for the wedding guests. And so off Mercy goes. And she goes first to the goat farm where Bodhi lives. He lives in one of the converted out buildings on this lovely goat farm that makes fabulous artisanal goat cheeses. And instead of finding Bodhi, she finds a stranger skewered by a pitchfork in the barn. And then
that's pretty dramatic.
Kind of goes down, goes downhill from there.
Right. Well, yeah, all hell breaks loose. It absolutely does. And I think that's really dramatic. If we're mystery readers, we are prepared to find something untoward when they go looking for Bodhi. Of course, we think it might be Bodhi, but we don't find Bodhi, at least not right then.
Right. No, that was fun. I had never, when you're a mystery writer, coming up with a new way to kill people is always interesting. And so we just happened to have a pitchfork when I was gardening, and I saw this pitchfork and I thought, ooh, pitchfork, that would be an interesting way to kill somebody. So I got to spend a day researching how to kill someone quickly and effectively with a pitchfork.
Well, how do you do it?
Right through the heart.
But that requires excellent aim. So, what happens if you miss the heart and get them through the shoulder or the neck?
Yeah, then you're in trouble. So especially if he's armed. So it's hard to say, this guy, that's one reason, they know right away, Mercy knows, the medical examiner knows, okay, whoever did this knew what they were doing. because
Right.
it's
No, I think, yeah, exactly. It does argue some sort of experience, if not with a pitchfork, at least with other sorts of weapons, or at least some anatomical experience, knowing where to strike. But sometimes, it's often interesting how that can fairly often in crime fiction lead to the unmasking of the murderer. The fact that they have a particular skill set, or the fact that the direction of let's say it's, throat cutting or something, that it proves whether the person was left or right-handed or other stuff.
Sure.
And now,
Sure.
I think you probably read in the Washington Post today that DNA, they found a crime. I can't remember how many years and years ago, but 45 years ago, I think they finally solved a murder by using the new genetic stuff.
Right.
And they found, apparently they were able to get some sort of trace DNA from the victim's clothing, and they never had any way to match it. They had profiles of the people that lived in the building, and then I don't remember exactly how it wasn't, like 23andMe, but anyhow, eventually they were able to narrow it down. So the only person who in proximity to the victim, this guy is the only person that it could have been. And I find that so fascinating. But what kind of a challenge is that going to be for you as a writer to have to deal with that sort of thing?
Oh, I just love that. And on the weekends, I often have 2 running shows on in the background as I do whatever it is I'm doing. One is Forensics Files, which they're always going back to old cases and solving them now with the DNA techniques that they have now that they didn't have when the crime happened. I love Forensic Files. And I love shows like Northwood's Law, Northwood's Law is New Hampshire game wardens and they follow them around and they help moose, they do all kinds of stuff. They help moose, they trap bears, and take the bears back into the woods. They track down poachers. They do all kinds of cool stuff. And I do a lot of research, and I have some game warden friends and some canine handler friends. And I love all that stuff. So research is my favorite part, actually, because I was a reporter, and that's the fun part for me, is learning all these new things and meeting these new people and dogs.
How do the I was just going to ask, Barbara, I was just going to ask, for the person who might not be familiar with the earlier books, the first one was Borrowing of the Bones, right? Mm-hmm. And then can you just maybe give just a brief intro about the series and the main players and how the dogs, sure, the Mission Canine crew features into these stories? Sure.
So Mercy Carr is a former military policewoman. She's wounded in Afghanistan. And in the same battle, her fiance, Martinez, is killed. And he's a dog handler. And Elvis is his bomb-sniffing dog. Now, I knew from doing a fundraiser with Mission Canine Rescue, which is an organization that helps make sure that military dogs who retire are sent home to forever homes. That's usually true with Army dogs, but the defense contractor dogs can often end up in very bad situations. And I knew that. So I made Elvis one of those defense contractor dogs. So Martinez, the last thing he says to Mercy as he's dying is, "Take care of my dog." So now she's lost her fiance. She's been wounded. The dog is a mess because now the dog has PTSD from the battle and from losing his handler. And they both come home to Vermont, where she is from, and they're going to march off their grief in the wilderness, right? They both lost their man and their mission, and now they have to find a new life and make a new life for themselves. And as a military brat myself, I've often seen military men and women, when they make that transition to civilian life, it can be a tough transition. So I wanted to write about that because I'd experienced that with my father and with other military people that I know. And I have enormous respect for the military and their families and what they go through. So that was my heroine, and this was the dog. And so now they don't really like each other, they don't really know each other. These Malinois, the Malinois are the kinds of dogs that Elvis is, and the kind of dog that often is a military bomb-sniffing dog. They're very fierce. They're very one man, one mission kind of dogs. So she has to bond with him, right? And so they're walking through the wilderness every day, marching off their grief, and they run across a crime scene. So she has to contact the local game warden, Troy Warner, and he has a dog, a search and rescue dog named Susie Bear. And so the four of them solve crimes in the wilderness. It starts with a borrowing of bones and that initial crime scene, and it goes on from there where they team up, Mercy and Troy, Elvis and Susie Bear, and together they solve these crimes in the Vermont wilderness.
And then I was just going to say, one of the books dealt with a boy with autism.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Can you talk about that just a little bit?
Well, that's Blind Search, was the second book in the series. And I had read that, you always hear about people getting lost in the woods and they're hunters or they're hikers. But in truth, the most common, the people most likely to get lost in the woods are not hunters or hikers. They're children with autism and elderly people with dementia. And what happens is they hide, they get scared, they hide, they don't answer to calls. So it's hard for human searchers to find them. But the dogs, because they're operating on scent, they can find them. And so I had read all these stories about kids who were rescued and elderly people who were rescued by dogs. Matter of fact, one of my research partners is a wonderful guy, a game warden from Vermont named Rob Sterling. Isn't that a great name, Barbara? Rob Sterling, that's his real name. That's a great name.
That's
Rob
amazing.
Sterling.
Who knew there were two of them?
I know, exactly. Rob Sterling and his dog Crockett. And they just rescued a child in the woods of Vermont just last week, I think. So.
That's amazing. When I lived in eastern Tennessee near the Appalachian Trail, there were people who used to get lost, and it was children so often, and they would get into rhododendron hills. And once you got into one, you lost all sense of everything, and you couldn't get out again. And the only way they were usually found was using a dog.
Yes. Dogs are really your best shot. We have here, I live in New Hampshire, and here in New Hampshire, Mount Washington, people are always getting lost in Mount Washington because they underestimate how dangerous it is and can be to hike it around Mount Washington. And so, these are tricky situations, right? Because they're tricky for the human searchers. They're tricky for the people who go out to search for them because it's dangerous work, and the dogs can be invaluable.
So to pursue this question that Patrick started out, let's talk about your third book, because in fact, The Wedding Plot's your fourth book. So we've done A Borrowing of Bones, then we've done Blind Search, The Hiding Place, which was the book we talked about last year on Zoom. You want to remind people about it?
Yes, The Hiding Place was a fun book to write. It takes place during that transition between winter and spring, which here in New England can be very dangerous, right? Because the ice may very well crack right underneath your feet. So it's all about a backstory. What happened with The Hiding Place was when I did Blind Search, I didn't have a very good title. I can't remember what it was, but it wasn't very good. And my editor said, you have to have a better title. And I know from being an agent and being an editor that if I don't find a title I like, they'll pick something I hate. So I better come up with one that I like, right? So I made a list of 100 titles that I could live with. And my editor was very pleased. He went off to talk to his editorial team, and he came back and he said, okay, the publisher likes Blind Search, which was perfect for the book because that was the one about the little boy with autism that's lost in the woods. That was perfect. He said, but the editorial director really likes The Hiding Place. So your next book is going to be The Hiding Place. I'm like, okay. And then he said to me, because Mercy's grandfather was a sheriff and he died in the line of duty in an arrest gone wrong. And my editor said to me, I think the next book, The Hiding Place, already have a title, should be about a cold case, one of her grandfather's cold cases that she then solves. So that's how that book came about. Really, I just sort of took my marching orders and wrote the book, but it was a lot of fun. It was a great book and a lot of fun to write.
That's really interesting. Yeah, you referenced the Mercy's grandfather. It comes up 2 or 3 times in this book, the fact that he didn't wait for backup and, he died and all of that. But back to that earlier thread we were talking about, more better forensics better scientific tools and so forth to investigate crimes. Does that make it more appealing to you as an author to include a cold case? Because now there's so many opportunities to go back and work a cold case, or a cold case can lead to a new case in the present.
Right.
It seems to me that all this technology would kind of give a lot of crime writers a nudge in that direction when looking for a story.
Well, certainly my editor thought so. I didn't want to write a cold case. And the reason I didn't, it's kind of a craft thing, is because I didn't see how I could write a cold case story without using flashbacks, at least a couple flashbacks. And I'm always so leery of flashbacks because often the reader, you turn to page 1, you get involved in the story, you expect to go to the end. And every time you write a flashback, it puts the story in reverse. And the reader, may or may not like that, and you could lose the reader. So I was kind of scared of flashbacks, frankly. And I thought, how am I going to write a cold case? How can I do this and not write flashbacks? So I'm going to have to learn to write flashbacks that won't slow the story down. So I just started reading all my betters, and I read a bunch, all kinds. I read C.J. Box, I read Craig Johnson, I read Ellie Griffiths, all my favorite, Julia Spencer Fleming, all my favorite writers. And then I read Attica Locke, whom I had not read yet. And Attica Locke, she's a wonderful writer, and she really does a lot of flashbacks, and she handles them so well in her Ranger series, her Texas Ranger series. And so she taught me by reading those books. That's how I learned to write a flashback. So not as well as she does, but I don't. I mean, sometimes I did if it's really short.
Right.
The problem with italics is, as an editor, you're not allowed to let your writers use a lot of italics because your eyes get tired. Yeah. And so a lot of times the reader will stop reading because their eyes are tired, but they'll blame the story, right? And not the italics. So you have to be careful with italics.
Very interesting.
Yeah. We had a very interesting conversation on Monday with Lisa Jewell. Patrick and I did, with Lisa Jewell and Eve Chase. And I pointed out that both of their books are, in fact, past and present. And the way they structured them, honestly, Paula, you should look at Lisa Jewell's The Family Remains. It isn't out till August 9th, but it's amazing the way she structured that story so that the reader doesn't get booted out. There are no italics. I found it completely fascinating. And we talked about that a little bit, didn't we, Patrick?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh, cool. That's why I love reading just to read, but I also love reading as a writer. When I was a very young woman living in Northern California, a great writer friend and I, Susan Reynolds, we took a class at UC Berkeley from a very handsome, talented guy named Jeremy Larner, and he won the Oscar for original screenplay for the movie The Candidate. Remember that, with Robert Redford? Anyway, he taught a class called Reading for Writers. And that was the whole thing, is how to learn to read as a writer. And it was one of the best classes I ever took in terms of learning to read, not just to see what happens, but to see how did they do it? And how can I do that? How can I apply that to my own work? It was great.
Wow. Well, I'm seeing a fair amount of it. I just read, I just read Alice Feeney's new book called Daisy Darker, which we'll be having her live at the Poison Pen on August 30th. And it's a Gothic. This is a Gothic, the like of which I have not read. And the narrator, so far in my experience, is maybe unique. But I do find that the way she structured the story was fascinating. So, but the reason I mention it is that it's clearly a tribute to And Then There Were None. It's a version of putting a number of people in an old house on an island cut off from the mainland by the sea, and then they begin to die, and you can't really explain what's happening. And she even says at the end, there's a scene in which when you get to the sort of explication part at the very end, where she specifically brings in, Alice does, Agatha Christie, And Then There Were None. And I thought that was interesting. And, we've noticed, Patrick, haven't we, that And Then There Were None is having some kind of a huge moment right now. There's so many books that are taking that story structure and making it contemporary.
Yes, definitely. Actually, I have a question I'm just trying to be mindful of some of the questions that are coming in on Facebook. And one of them is from Marnie, and she would like to know, did you know the surprise ending, no spoilers, when you sat down to write this book?
I did. I always wanted to write that. So I love that.
Of course, you can't say what it is.
No, I can't say what it is, but yes, I did. And that was kind of the fun of the book. One of the fun parts of the book for me is that I knew. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew. But thanks for asking.
Christina, our friend Christina Estes, says, a question for Paula. How do you juggle your days between writing, agenting, and of course, yoga?
Oh my God, I am so bad. Some people are so organized and they, Hank Philippi Ryan has this sheet and she writes down every word count every day. And I just try to do as much as possible every day. I have a day job, right? And my day job takes precedent. And so I just kind of write when I can, which is often either early in the morning or late at night, right? When my kids were little, I read a wonderful essay in a book called The Writer on Her Work. And one of the women said, I write at night when the kids are asleep because I am not needed in their dreams. And I thought that was so beautiful. I am not needed in their dreams. And now I find myself, with my mother here in the same position. So I'm not needed in her dreams. So
in her second
I write
childhood.
at night. Yeah. Yes.
This is a good moment, Patrick, for me to disengage here because I think it's probably aggravating to just hear my voice. So why don't I let you and Paula take questions and talk about writing or whatever it is. Okay. And I will try desperately to connect to the internet if it comes back so that we can do our 5:30 event. Or we're going to have to do this all over again. So anyway, Paula, thank you for your patience and putting up with this. I'm truly apologetic, but you and Patrick will have a wonderful finish together.
No problem.
I'll see you.
Well, thank you so
I'll see
much,
you next
Barbara.
book. You bet.
Yes,
Bye.
thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Yeah, for those of you who are just tuning in, Barbara, she's up in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and they're having some sort of tech glitch. So she had to, at least she was able to join by phone. So that was.
Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah.
Yay.
Yeah, but that's why you saw me in a disembodied voice coming in, but that was Barbara. Well, actually, I have a question for you. By the way,
Sure.
Anybody watching, if you have questions for Paula, please go ahead and send them in. I'll be monitoring that as I can. But I have a question for you regarding your menagerie of your own animals. I was reading about your lineup here, and I understand you have a pandemic puppy named Blondie in the mix.
Yes.
Tell us about your crew.
Okay, well, we have our Newfoundland Retriever rescue named Bear, and Bear was the inspiration for Susie Bear in the books, the game warden search and rescue job. And Susie Bear, like Bear, our own Bear, is the friendliest dog in the world, the happiest dog in the world, just, Mr. Congeniality, that's Bear. And then we have Bliss, who's a Great Pyrenees Australian Shepherd mix, who's very much a Great Pyrenees in that she's kind of like a cat. She's suspicious of everyone. Great Pyrenees, they guard the herd. They don't move the herd because they don't really move. They just sit on the outside and the perimeter and keep predators away, especially at night. So she likes to bark at night. That's her thing. But she doesn't do a lot, right? She just hangs out. She's very cat-like in that regard. And then we have our pandemic puppy, Blondie. Now, Blondie is a Malinois, just like Elvis in the books. And Malinois, if you ask people who have them, will tell you that they're sleeker, smarter German Shepherds. So that's what they're like.
Oh,
but they're very smart. They're wildly athletic. I've had a lot of dogs. I've never had a dog like this. We were very lucky to get her. The place where White River Animal Rescue up in White River Junction, Vermont, that's where we got Bliss. And the wonderful woman who runs that shelter and that rescue, she loves the books. And she knew I was looking for a Malinois rescue, but they're hard to find, Malinois rescues. At least they were. And so, because they're not dogs for everybody, right? You can't just go out and get a Malinois. You have to really be prepared to take on a Malinois because they are fierce and they are wildly athletic and very energetic. And she calls and she says, "Oh, I have this Malinois." I said, "Oh yeah, sign us up." So we came over and we got Blondie. And now I have a living, breathing Elvis in my house, just like in the books. And she is awesome. She's really smart and just a joy in every way.
Is she super lithe? Can she just take off and lope really quick?
Oh yeah. I just throw the ball a million times. I can do everything now and throw the ball at the same time. I can do Zoom calls. I can write. I can talk on the phone. I can do everything. I just keep throwing the ball because that's what keeps her busy. She loves her ball.
We used to have a rescue greyhound, and just a beautiful, beautiful dog. Gentle, but yeah, she was a total couch potato. And they're used to that schedule of 23 hours a day. They're in their crate or whatever. But then it's showtime. We would let her out in the backyard, and she's,
That's awesome.
Beautiful dog. How do you, with the dogs, the rescue dogs, canines, and their methods and how they work? How do you keep up with? Did you have to do a lot of research to get started with the series, or?
Well, I had done this wonderful fundraiser for Mission Canine Rescue, at which I met a lot of dog handlers and their dogs, soldiers and their bomb sniffing dogs. I met cops and their drug sniffing dogs. I befriended Rob Sterling, the game warden from Vermont, and his dog Crockett. And I'll tell you a funny story. Like, I was pulled over recently and the cop came to my window. And he had a badge that said Canine Unit. And I said, "Oh, instead of asking, what did I do wrong?" Apparently I had an expired sticker or something. Anyway, but I said, "Are you Canine Unit?" I said, "I write these books with Canine." And so I ended up giving him a book and giving me and his partner a book and getting his card. And the dog had a card. His dog's name was Falco. Falco had a card. And so now I have another research opportunity with my local Canine Unit guy. So
he didn't write you a ticket, did he?
No, he gave me a verbal warning.
Stern warning.
Yes, exactly. But I made a friend, and I love that. That's what's so much fun about writing these books, is meeting these dog handlers and their dogs.
I'll bet. Yeah, and I'm sure that some of these dogs, defy, what you think they're going to do. I'm sure they all have their own distinct personalities, even despite their training. Is that true?
Absolutely. Yeah. Yes. Dogs are like people. They're completely different. Our three dogs couldn't be more different. And then, of course, Ursula the cat is another whole thing altogether.
I was going to ask you about her.
She's 13 years old. She's a terror. She keeps my mom company now, which is good because she doesn't really think much of the dogs.
No.
So she has her own door. She goes in and out as she pleases. She's a good mouser.
Does she seek higher ground? Does she go up on cabinets and look down on them with contempt?
Yes, she does. And I think that's part of the fun for her. She, especially outside, because, she can go anywhere she wants outside, and they have their own yard. And when we go outside for walks, they're on a leash. Gotcha. And she doesn't have to have a leash, of course. So she loves to torture them with that.
Is there anything else that you would like to say about the wedding plot that we haven't gotten into without giving too much away? Or have you covered most of it?
Well, I really enjoyed writing the wedding plot after I got into it. Like I said, it was hard with my dad, but once I wrote my dad into the book, then it became kind of fun, right? And it reminded me how much I love weddings and what a fun opportunity that was as a writer to write about a wedding. And I'm writing book 5 now, and it's a season later. So it's Halloween. So that's fun too, right? I got to write weddings in June, and now I'll get to write Halloween book with, here in New England, my house is 260 years old. And so we have ghosts, and we have, of course, witches. We have all kinds of history that I can play on with a Halloween book. So I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, wow. And autumn in New England What a beautiful time of year. You know, the leaves change.
It's spectacular.
Yeah.
It really is.
Steeped in Americana too, of all kinds, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. My house was built by a lieutenant who fought in the American Revolution.
Wow. Amazing. Now, do you have a tentative title for that one, or do you have a list of titles?
No, I am starting a list. I have started a list because, titles, sometimes the best titles come when you're farther into the book, right? Or even finish the book. Sometimes I have a title from the beginning, but if I don't, I usually come up with one in the writing itself.
Something will suggest itself.
Yes, and I love titles like, say, The Color Purple, which Alice Walker's fabulous book, which the title comes from a line in the book.
Right.
And I love that. I haven't really pulled that off yet, but I'm working on that. That's my goal, is to get a title that comes from a line in the book.
It is kind of cool when you're in a book and you come to a very important scene where that's where it comes from.
Right, exactly. I love that as a reader. I love that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's see here. My friend Mark, who's watching, he would like to know, and these are some pretty standard questions, but do you have a favorite author, or who are some of your favorite authors, and what are you currently reading? To put you
I
on
have
top.
a million favorite authors, okay? Starting with Shakespeare, Jane Austen, and all the way up through, crime fiction. And I mentioned some of them, Julia Spencer Fleming, and, Ellie Griffiths, and Anne Cleves, and I love all the British. I really love Colin Dexter. But I also just read a book that I truly, truly love by a relatively new writer. It's just her second novel. Her name is Annie Hartnett. She's from New England.
Okay.
And she wrote this great book. You should have her on. She wrote this great book that's sort of like Our Town. Remember that play from Thornton Wilder? Our Town meets Alice Hoffman / John Irving. Okay. And it's written from the point of view of the dead people in this cemetery in this small New England town.
Oh, wow. Okay.
It is so great. And it's a lot. Yeah, it's just great. It's beautifully written. And it takes place there's a place in New Hampshire that's a private park. It's owned by zillionaires or whatever. It's private. There's all kinds of wild animals in there that they used for hunting. It's a private hunting club. Nobody can ever get in there. And even Annie Hartnett, writing the book, couldn't get in there. But she uses that as the inspiration for this book. It's just a great book. It's called Unlikely Animals.
Oh, I've seen. Yeah, I think I've seen that. I didn't realize what it was about. Unlikely.
It's great.
Animals. Okay. All right.
It's a lot of fun.
What is that town? Oh, shoot. Isn't there a town up in your neck of the woods that is famous for paranormal activity? Or there are probably several of them. Oh gosh.
Yes, and I've been reading up on ghost stories in New England. So I'm trying. Of course, there's Lizzie Borden's house.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, there's Salem, Massachusetts.
Sure. Yep.
Where I lived there. I lived in Salem for a while. But there's other places too. Yeah. Oh yeah. Salem's a great town. It's a lot of fun on Halloween.
I'll bet.
Yeah, and as it turns out, one of my ancestors was a witch accused in the trials. Her name is Mary Bradbury, and she was not hanged because this was sort of late in the game, and people were getting worried about all these hangings. And her husband apparently was a rich sea captain, and he paid off the warden or whatever. And so she was not hanged, but she was accused of appearing as a blue boar in the backyard by another one of my relatives. So I don't know what that says about our family.
Oh boy.
It's nice to know that you may be descended from a real witch.
Yeah, an interesting kind of historical family feud going on there, right?
Right, exactly. So yeah, so that may come to play in this new book, the Halloween book. I don't know, we'll see.
Wonderful. Well, Paula, it's been a real delight to talk with you and with Barbara, and thanks for being a sport about our little technical issues. People watching, that the new book is The Wedding Plot, and we do have autographed copies in stock right now. So if you'd like one, you know how to get in touch with us. Again, thanks so much, Paula. We hope to get you out here to the desert at some point.
Absolutely. It was lovely to be with you as always. Thank you so much for having me.
You bet. Thanks, everybody.